Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Deep Six, the Deep State, my daily commentary on the news today. By the way, tomorrow I'm going to be on the air starting at 2 o'clock, and because I have something to do at 4, actually, see a dentist. But it'll be on for 24 hours, or really for infinity after that. But if you want it live and fresh, we're baking the rolls at 2 instead of at 4 tomorrow. I got to tell you that this Hillary, Rhenium, Dossier, Trump scandal is way worse than I thought it was, especially even when Eileen and I wrote our book, Rogue Spooks. It is far worse than even that. So share this video with your friends, because they really have a story to tell here. And obviously none of it appears in the mainstream media. You know 2 facts. One, you know that it has come out that Hillary's campaign paid Fusion GPS $1,020,000 to develop dirt on Trump. And you know that Fusion GPS paid Christopher Steele, the former British MI6 agent, $168,000 to conduct the research and amass the dossier. So, let's begin with what happened to the other $852,000. We don't know. Now, we also know that there has been speculation that Fusion paid reporters to cover this story. Steele, I'm sorry, excuse me, I mean that later. Stay with another, erase that. We also know that Christopher Steele has admitted that he paid his sources. He paid the people who contributed to his dossier. Steele paid Russian sources quoted in his dossier. Michael Morell, the former acting head of the CIA, said Mr. Steele paid the Russian intelligence sources who provided the information and never met them directly. He interviewed them through intermediaries. Okay, so if Hillary paid Fusion, and Fusion paid Steele, and Steele paid witnesses, Hillary paid witnesses, right? Connect the dots. And probably that's where a lot of that $852,000 went. So not only do we have Hillary benefiting from these charges against Trump, not only do we have her doing about the same thing she said Trump did, only worse, but now we have Hillary supplying the money that was used to bribe the witnesses to make up the lies that went into the dossier. She literally created this dossier. Not only paid for it, but paid the sources to give it to Steele. Just an incredible story. So connect the dots. Hillary's campaign paid Fusion. Fusion paid Steele. Steele paid his sources. Ergo, Hillary's campaign paid Steele's sources. So not only did Hillary benefit from the disinformation, she paid for its fabrication. Since much of the data was false, we're driven to the conclusion that Hillary paid to fabricate the stories that animate the dossier. Now, who are the sources who were paid by Hillary, by her campaign? According to the dossier, Source A was a senior Russian foreign ministry figure. Source B was a former top-level intelligence officer still active in the Kremlin. Source C was a senior Russian financial officer still active in the Kremlin. And Source G was simply identified as a Kremlin official. So here we have a presidential candidate, a former Secretary of State, using campaign money to pay off officials in the Russian intelligence establishment to fabricate a story about Donald Trump. I mean, that is just breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking. And then, let's look at the other end of the feeding cycle. Once the dossier was published, there was a frantic effort to get it published. And then, once it was published, an even more frantic effort to back it up, cover up the obvious lies and the untruths that were in it, and make it to be a credible document which could be the basis for the appointment of a special prosecutor. Well, a big part of that was the media playing its role in publicizing this thing, spinning it, and giving it credibility despite the obvious lack of credibility on the surface. I mean, for God's sakes, it said that the guy who arranged this whole deal met frequently in Prague with Russian intel officials, and he'd never been to the Czech Republic in his life. And the passport showed he'd been stateside during that period. It said there were two people who hacked the DNC website, and it turns out one of them was a Cypriot businessman who had nothing to do with it, and in fact is now suing for defamation, and a prisoner in the Gulag who is inaccessible, serving a 20-year sentence in a prison 600 miles from Moscow without a computer or a telephone. So to report that garbage, and the prostitutes peeing on the bed in Moscow, to report that kind of nonsense, the reporters may well have been paid. Guess who? By the Hillary campaign. Let's talk about the other end of the feeding cycle. Did Hillary pay journalists to hype the story? Fusion, through whom she would have paid it, refuses to comply with the subpoena from the House Intelligence Committee for its bank records, a request specifically geared to determine if it had paid any journalists. Fusion doesn't deny that it made such payments, doesn't admit it or deny it. If it hadn't, you'd think they'd deny it. But says that it's protected by the First Amendment from disclosing any payments that it did make. So Hillary's campaign paid Russian sources, instruments of Vladimir Putin, Russian finance, Russian ministry, Russian intelligence, Kremlin, paid Russian sources, instruments of Vladimir Putin, to provide fabricated evidence to sell the idea that Trump was colluding with Putin, when in fact she was the one doing the colluding. And then she made paid journalists to report, spin, and hype the story that resulted. Her efforts have been fabulously successful. She wasn't elected, of course, but for God's sakes, the entire Trump transition, the entire first year of the administration, the appointment of a special prosecutor, all are directly related to this dossier that Hillary paid for. Hillary paid the sources that amassed it, and Hillary may well, we don't know yet, but it's under subpoena, paid the journalists who hyped it. Unbelievable collection.
We have Conchetta Andrizzi Adams asks, do you think they will all pay for their crimes?
Well, yeah, I think they may well. I think that this evidence, these accusations that are mounting fast and furious, no pun, and with the various subpoenas out there, they're building a case where there really has to be a special prosecutor. And I think he's going to catch up with most of them, including Mrs. Clinton.
And Birch Trent asks, why don't campaigns have oversight to watch for this type of thing?
They do. They do. The FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, is the overseer, and you have to report to the FEC. And you have to report to the FEC any expenditure and any contribution. So when Hillary gave $1 million to Fusion, she just wrote it off as legal fees, no itemization, which ducked the law, maybe complied, but probably not, and probably violated it blatantly.
And Jeff Baird says, how about the dozens of reporters entertained Czechs Podesta?
Entertained what?
Czechs Podesta. He might have been sarcastic. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Well, did Podesta pay reporters? We don't know, but certainly there was a good chance that Fusion did, and if they did, they were using Hillary's money to do it. Now, there is another element of this story that has just emerged that will also knock your socks off. You remember that the big eureka, the big deal, the proof of collusion was that Donald Trump Jr., in his 30s, met with the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya, who was lobbying for the repeal of the Magnitsky Act, the sanctions on Russians because of Magnitsky's murder. And that meeting was supposed to be evidence of collusion between Trump and the Russians, the fact that Trump's son met with the Russian lawyer. And that was touted at the time as huge. And Trump, I don't think, disclosed that meeting, Trump Jr., and he was on the griddle, and everybody was saying, this is the proof, this is the smoking gun. Well, First of all, it turned out that, according to several people who were at the meeting, I believe one of them was Jared Kushner. I believe that, I'm not sure, I think Manafort was at the meeting. There were others. And they all agreed that the issue of cooperation in the campaign, collusion, never came up. The reason that Veselnitskaya got Trump to agree to the meeting is she said that she was going to give him dirt on Hillary. And he naturally, of course, accepted the opportunity to get dirt on Hillary and went into the meeting. But then in the meeting, she mainly talked about lifting the sanctions that were imposed on Russia in return for Russia lifting its ban on foreign adoptions of Russian infants, which was imposed by Putin in retaliation for the sanctions. No mention of collusion, no mention of any of the stuff that the dossier talked about. Okay, now it appears that the head of Fusion, GPS, Simpson, first name anyway, Simpson, met with Veselnitskaya right before and right after the meeting with Trump, immediately before it and immediately after it. Now, Fusion was paying Veselnitskaya to be its employee in its lobbying effort, paid for by the Kremlin, to repeal the sanctions that were imposed upon Russia. So there could be a legitimate reason for the meeting, which was, here's what you should say going in, and then debrief coming out. But it's also very likely, and I think most likely, that the meeting going in was to try to establish the fact of collusion, and the meeting coming out was to underscore collusion and to try to make it stick, and to try to make this the key meeting which resulted in this collusion. All of this really goes to give one another view about what actually happened in the dossier. I assumed, and Eileen assumed in writing our book Rogue Spooks, that the dossier was the figment either of rabid anti-Trump people or possibly of the CIA, the FBI, and maybe even MI6. It's now emerging, when we look at the closeness of the relationship between Hillary Clinton and her campaign and Fusion and the Kremlin, that it's possible that the Kremlin was the source of this information and was put out deliberately as disinformation to try to attack Donald Trump by saying he's too close to Russia, even with Russia saying that Russia was putting this out as a way of trying to defeat Trump and to help Hillary. Remember, Hillary had been the linchpin of the deal to buy uranium, to let Putin take over the uranium, and she had agreed to that. And Bill had accepted a $500,000, in effect, bribe from Russia to let that sale go ahead. And Russia had been doing all sorts of espionage and bribery and other stuff to try to sell this deal. And it must have come as a godsend when Hillary approved it. And now, Russia, by pretending that Trump was colluding with them, may well have laid the basis for giving Hillary a big campaign issue to use against Trump. This dossier is such a intricate thing. It's like the movie or the play Sleuth. Always a double meaning, and as more facts come out, other meanings become possible. But I think that certainly is a theory worth thinking about.
Dick, Harriet McKay writes in, has Hillary been granted immunity in the email scandal and we just don't know it?
No.
And we have Anthony Trump wants to know...
Say my regards to your dad.
No, Trump, T-R-O-M-P.
Okay.
Did you tell Donna Brazile that Hillary is finished, and is she now doing a power play for post-Hillary?
Did I tell her?
Yeah, did you tell Donna Brazile that Hillary is finished?
No, I like Donna, but I haven't spoken with her in a couple of years. I think Hillary is finished, but I don't think Hillary knows that. And it'll take a while before it dawns on her. And what was the second part of that?
And is she now doing a power play for post-Hillary?
Yeah, I think she is. There's a competition now going on for control of the Democratic Party. And it's a three-cornered competition. The blacks, the left, and the establishment. The blacks are Donna Brazile, Cory Booker, Obama, Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts. The progressives are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And the establishment is Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and probably various other governors and senators rattling around. And that war is going on now, a really serious, bitter confrontation. And this is part of Donna Brazil's effort from the black community to trip up Hillary from the establishment side.
And Lori White asks, why do the Clintons always manage to get away with everything, starting with Whitewater and all the crimes that they've committed time after time?
Well, it's complicated with each one. They're very careful. They're both lawyers. They're very careful about what steps they make and what they say and what their pretenses are. But this one may be a little bit deeper than that. Now, I want to talk with you a bit about the election results yesterday in Virginia and in New Jersey. Much is being made of the Democratic victories, and it's being hailed as a precursor of 2018, which I don't think it is. And it's being hailed that Trump's base deserted him and was unhappy with him, and that's why the Republican candidates lost. Now, of course, bear in mind both of those states went for Hillary in the last election by roughly the same margin that they went for the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in this election. But when you look at the exit polling in Virginia, you see something very interesting. Among white high school graduates, which is the core of the Trump campaign, the core of the Trump base, they voted for Gillespie, the Republican, by 72 to 26, a margin of 46 points. So it was huge, and that was about the same margin by which they voted for Trump in the election of 2016. He didn't lose a point. His people were still in place and intact and voting for him. Among white college graduates, Gillespie also won, but only by 51 to 48, a margin of 3. So Trump's base is absolutely secure and has weathered this contest. Let's bear in mind that New Jersey is New York at this point. Roughly 70% of the state gets New York television. The crossovers between New York and New Jersey are so frequent and so evident. And mostly, if New York is going to be a solid Democratic state, New Jersey is too. Everybody, I think, realizes that. But Virginia is a different story. Virginia used to be a southern state that would be conservative and would go Republican. Not anymore. Because Virginia itself, the old Virginia, is outvoted by Washington, D.C. More than half of the vote now is cast from the Washington suburbs. McCain and Fairfax and Alexandria, Arlington, all of those communities which are Washington suburbs are populated with people that work in Washington, D.C., and usually work for the government or inevitably for some contractor or a lawyer or a professional who works for the government. So they are absolutely the establishment. That is the deep state right there. And they will support the Democratic Party because it is the party of the people that work for the government. It's the party of big government. You know, when our founding fathers set up the country, they decided not to let Washington, D.C. have any votes in the Electoral College. They were only awarded a representation about 30 or 40 years ago, and then they were held to the minimum of 3 votes, the least any state had, even though its population would probably entitle it to 5 votes. And the reason is that they didn't want the tail to wag the dog. They didn't want the federal employees to run the politics of the federal government. And they don't, but now in Northern Virginia, they certainly do. That's also why Maryland is a solidly Democratic state. So I don't think this has much impact on the future.
Glenn Rogers asks, do you think he lost because Trump's base did not want to vote for the establishment?
Yeah, I think that had something to do with it. I think Gillespie certainly was part of the establishment. He was one of the political consultants that had always run the Republican Party, and he did not espouse the kind of anti-establishment rhetoric and positions that Donald Trump did. Trump was right. He never really embraced his agenda. So I think that was part of it. But not a huge amount, because among white high school graduates, Trump's base, they all voted for him. And there was no defection at all. So with that in mind, I don't think it was really a question of a loss of support by Trump or a gain by the Democrats. I think it was just more and more of the vote is coming from Washington, D.C. and its suburbs. And by the way, the campuses in Virginia, where most students now vote at their campus, not at their home address. Now, today's video, like the others, is sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. And in the last few days, I've underscored this terribly dramatic development. China and Russia and Iran have now agreed that China and Russia will buy oil from Iran and will pay for it in Chinese currency, the yuan. And the Chinese have agreed that they will make gold available to anyone who has yuan. They'll make their currency convertible into gold. The United States doesn't. We haven't since 1933. And this is part of a strategy by the anti-American countries to try to weaken the power of the dollar as the hegemonic universal currency. And to do that by promoting the yuan and saying, hey guys, if you use the yuan, we'll give you actual gold. We won't just give you funny money, another national currency dependent on the policies of that country. We'll give you gold. And that's something no other country is willing to do for no other currency. And probably Brazil and India, part of the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, are probably going to follow suit. Now, with half of the world's population wanting gold as opposed to dollars, you're going to see a big increase in the demand for gold, which is going to cause a big increase in the price of gold. And that's why it might be a good idea for you to be in touch with the Patriot Gold Group, patriotgoldgroup.com, or to call them at 800-476-5675. And they'll give you a guide to investing, and they'll give you $1,500 of free silver to kick off your investing portfolio. Now, Trump made a very significant move yesterday about the Medicaid program. You'll remember back in the dialogue about Obamacare, the Republicans wanted to repeal not just Obamacare, but the expansion of Medicaid that was a big part of Obamacare. Of the people who've been newly covered by Obamacare, 12 million have been covered by the insurance policy, but 13 million have been covered by Medicaid, the welfare policy. And that's the core, really, of the Obamacare expansion. And Trump, I think, is crippling the insurance expansion by an executive order expected to come out any day now, suggesting to states an executive order coming out any day now that says people do not have to pay fines if they don't have insurance. That is going to be gone. But now Trump has dropped the other shoe, affecting the Medicaid portion. He has issued a regulation saying that states may, at their own discretion, adopt work requirements as conditions precedent to drawing on Medicaid. Make people work for their Medicaid, just like they have to for welfare, so that there are no free rides, except if you're able-bodied. And that's a very important step. That step, more than anything else, when it was applied to welfare, cut the welfare rolls in half. And this will probably have a very similar effect on the Medicaid rolls. Now, a lot of really liberal states like New York and California probably will not choose to impose the work requirements, but a lot of others, Ohio and Pennsylvania and some others that expanded Medicaid, probably are going to insist on a work requirement. And that's going to rein in the cost of that program. It will also have the effect of really hurting the Northeast and really helping the Sun Belt, because the Northeast will be strapped paying for this Medicaid entitlement, crowding out money for education and everything else, forcing up taxes, and at the same time that it may lose the deductibility of its income tax. And in the long run, not the long run, the short run, this will tilt the map of the country and drain a lot of business and wealth and people from the Northeast into the Sun Belt. And that's a phenomenon that I think will have huge national repercussions. It really is transforming America in a very important way, and as a conservative, I welcome it, because most of those people, particularly after they've been driven out of the North by higher taxes, have gotten religion and will vote for lower taxes and Republican leadership in their new states.
Renee Durant asks, what about amnesty? Are they going to put that through?
They're going, Mitch McConnell is going to try, the Senate Majority Leader. And there are a number of Republican senators who are parts of the establishment who will join him. Agribusiness is pushing for that. What they want is amnesty for the dreamers, and then they want a guest worker program so they can import agricultural workers, pay them like dirt, throw Americans out of those jobs, and then send them back when they finish their work. But I don't think the conservatives are going to go along with that. And if they don't go along, it's not going to pass, because the Democrats will oppose anything that in any way restricts immigration. And if nobody passes anything, Trump can do what he likes. He can repeal Daca as he wishes, the Dreamers Act, and replace it with anything he wants. So this is something where Trump ultimately holds, pardon me, but the Trump card.
William Martin asks, can the entire Clinton Foundation be tied to Uranium One payment by the Russian officials?
Well, a lot of it can. Bill can. Hillary can. The Podesta brothers can. A lot of them can. And we just have to let this scandal unfold. But looks like a lot of them will. Now we're going to go to a brief ad break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk about a total reversal of the opening toward Cuba, engineered now by Donald Trump. Hi. You remember that under Obama, Obama reopened relations with Cuba and sought to normalize it, and basically readmitted Cuba to the good graces of the United States. But he didn't ask Trump. And conservatives like me believe that Cuba should be reintegrated into the global community only after it restores political freedom to its people. It is a vicious dictatorship. The jails are bulging with political prisoners, and including American Marxists and leftists who fled sentences in the United States, including some of the people responsible for the Francis Tavern bombing. And we demand that there either be measures for democracy and repatriation to the U.S. of the criminals who tried to kill our cops and blow up our banks, Joanne Chesimard and others, before we normalize relations. But now Trump has run an end run around them. The more I see this guy, the more I appreciate him, the more brilliant I think he is, and the more I'm just in awe of some of his moves. What he's doing now is he's saying, I will lift the embargo on travel and trade with Cuba, but only insofar as we're talking about companies and hotels and airlines which are not partially owned by the Cuban government. If something is not owned by the Cuban military or the Cuban government, but it's a private sector thing, you can go ahead. But if it's public sector, as many of the top hotels are, and very much of Cuba is, it's a socialist country, and they're owned either and controlled either by the military or by the government, he's not going to go along with that. And so that means that a lot of the tours that are staying in hotels that are government-owned or traveling on transportation in the country that's government-controlled can't go. If you have an existing reservation, you can go, but none in the future. And this is part of a very skilled application of our foreign policy that Trump is leading, an intellectual application. We talked about the Magnitsky Law, that instead of sanctioning a whole country and starving its people to death, it says, we're not going to sanction the country. We're going to sanction those individuals who are in power, and they cannot have their corrupt bank accounts in the United States, or visit the United States, or access our international banking system, which is a terribly effective constraint. And now he's applying a variant of that and saying we will stop Americans from traveling to Cuba or doing business with Cuba unless they steer clear of anything that is owned by the government or the military. Again, a very, very creative use of sanctions.
Dick, John Scorsone writes in, can we find out if uranium-1 ore made its way to Iran or North Korea?
No, we can't yet. We eventually will. We know that 25% of it was exported, most of it probably to Western Europe, or maybe to China, and possibly some of it to the terror-sponsoring countries. I just don't know, and we'll see.
And Eric Lawson asks, is Sessions hesitant to investigate his old colleague McCain?
I don't think Sessions is going to investigate McCain per se. I think he will investigate, I think eventually, the Justice Department will have to investigate how the dossier came to be, the role of the Clinton campaign in the dossier, and what its sources were, and how much it was relied on by the Justice Department and the FBI. And in that investigation, McCain, who's the guy who brought it from Steele and his people to Obama, where it got released through Comey, is obviously going to be a factor in that investigation.
And Susanna Canterbury asks, is there any truth to Paul Ryan slipping Daca amnesty into the tax reform legislation?
No, I don't think he's going to do that. And I think that Daca, to call it Daca amnesty is a misnomer. We may give up some punishment of the Daca dreamers, but if in return we get a border wall, a mandatory e-verify system, an end to the various entitlement programs that illegal immigrants get, hey, I'd give up a lot more than amnesty for a few 100,000 people to do that. It's a trade-off, and I think that's a good deal. On the other hand, giving them the amnesty without any of that stuff is a lousy deal. Now, I have the funny quote of the week. You know, the Menendez trial, where Senator Menendez is from New Jersey is on trial for bribing and being bribed by a dentist in Florida, and the dentist got all sorts of concessions, dentist or eye doctor, or maybe an eye doctor, and he got all sorts of concessions from Medicare and Medicaid and made a lot of money he shouldn't have, and then bestowed favors on Menendez, campaign contributions, trips on his yacht, all kinds of stuff like that. Well, there are a lot of evidentiary issues there that are very complicated, and the jurors have a tough time to wade through it. Case just went to the jury. And you wonder how sophisticated they're going to be, how knowledgeable they're going to be. Well, one juror showed up yesterday and said, I have a question, Your Honor. And the judge called the jury back and said, yes, what is your question? And he said, what's a senator? And that dumb ass, whatever, is going to determine the guilt or innocence of one of those breed, a United States senator. Oh, my God. But I do believe in the jury system for some reason. I do. But this one makes you pause.
Linda Gail Hudson asks, in light of the new revelations, do you still think Hillary will run again?
She'll want to, but I don't think it'll be possible.
And that's all my questions at this
Now, there's something I wanted to run through with you all. Well, there were two concepts. First of all, I'm noticing there's a new phenomenon abroad in the land, and it's worth talking about. I'm calling it spectator democracy. In our country, where we are the spectators for so many things, sporting events and the like, we are movies, plays, we are subjected to a barrage of information about the people who are entertaining us. And there's an increasing phenomenon of us using that power to take power and to bring some measure of control over those who are providing us with the entertainment. We don't pay them directly. We do it with our admissions and our cable fees and all of that. And we don't hire them or fire them. We choose them to decide what to watch. But still, we have a great deal of power, and now we are beginning to use that. I cite two examples. One is the boycott of the NFL because of the anthem, and they're refusing to stand for the national anthem. And the second is the increasing trouble that guys like Kevin Spacey are getting in getting their films, House of Cards, on television because of the allegations against him of sexual harassment. And a whole host of these producers and directors, Weinstein and others, and actors are being really hurt by that. Hurt in the pocketbook, hurt at the box office. And that's kind of a shareholder democracy that's fairly new in our country. We normally just watch what we watch based on how much it makes us laugh or think or feel, or watch the games based on who's winning and how exciting they are and what good athletes they are. But now we're increasingly injecting our own personal, political, and social convictions into that. And we're playing the role of voter spectators, a democracy of spectators. And I think that's very new in our political system. Now, the second thing I want to do is a little more complicated, but I've been meaning to do it for a couple of days, and I didn't have time, but now I do. Many, many, many of you have asked me, why aren't they moving faster on naming a special prosecutor? Why isn't Sessions investigating more? Why hasn't Hillary been indicted, and so forth? And I've said that I think as more evidence comes out, those steps are going to take place. But nevertheless, a lot of people are impatient about it. So there was a wonderful article that was written by a scholar, I forgot it and didn't catch the name, about the way the establishment blocks the Justice Department and the FBI from pursuing these leads. President Trump, it's a partisan article. It's written opposing the indictments, opposing the prosecution, saying Sessions should keep his hand off and Trump should butt out. And I don't agree with that, but I want to give you the reasoning so that we can discuss it. President Trump is putting his Justice Department in an impossible spot by demanding that it investigates his political opponents. Now, what a ridiculous sentence that is. If his political opponents are committing crimes, they need to be investigated. And saying that they have is not putting him in an impossible spot. He's asking them to do their job. But yet that is the establishment view. The president is essentially setting the department up for a major breach of protocol if it actually follows through on these requests. There is a reason why we have a norm against presidential interference in criminal investigations, says a former George W. Bush Homeland Security official and senior counsel from the Kenneth Starr investigation. Now, I would expect that from a member of the Bush administration. But what it's really saying is that the president has no role in the justice system. He appoints the Attorney General, he appoints the Deputy Attorney General, he appoints the judges, he appoints all of the actors, the head of the FBI, but he has no control over it. I think that's a ridiculous proposition. Trump's statements also leave his political opponents at the Justice Department in a bind. Do they follow the orders of the president who put them in their jobs, or do they follow the historical norms and rules of their department that mandate they stay clear of politics when they open, investigate, and close any criminal cases? That's a fair statement of the dilemma these folks face. I want to let them know, guys, you're in a democracy. The majority rules, and while the majority cannot oppress the minority, and there are laws that it has to follow, that does not. You can't bend over backwards and preclude the elected official from ordering a new investigation. The investigation doesn't find any wrongdoing, so be it. But if it does, it should. But why can you say that his political opponents should feel free to get anything they want, demand investigations, issue subpoenas, publish what they wish, maybe in exchange for bribes from Hillary, but the president can't do it? Why? Because we elected him. That makes no sense to me. Trump says, the saddest thing is, because I'm president of the United States, I'm not supposed to be involved in the Justice Department. I'm not supposed to be involved with the FBI. I'm not supposed to be doing the kinds of things I would love to be doing, and I'm very frustrated by it. It's very discouraging to me, and I'll be honest, I'm very unhappy with it, that the Justice Department isn't going. Maybe they are, but you know, as president, and I think you understand this, as president, you're not supposed to be involved in the process. So what he's saying is that he's the president, he just can't do anything. Now, none of this is a law. None of this is mandatory. This is entirely a norm, a tradition, and historical precedent. And I think what is happening now is Trump is building up his frustration level, building up his gumption, and also building up among public opinion the evidence that an intervention is needed for him to overcome those historical norms, defy them, and intervene. Now, Rod Rosenstein, who for some crazy reason, stupid reason, Trump reappointed, he's an Obama appointee, as Deputy Attorney General, and then when Sessions recused himself, he became, in effect, the acting Attorney General on the issue of special counsel and collusion, who needs to go himself because he's implicated in the cover-up of the Rhenium 1 investigation. He said, "It is not that people won't express opinions. In Washington, you have lots of opinions. You have 535 legislators down the street. They're on television every day telling us their opinion about what we should do." What a contemptuous way to treat democracy. Who the hell elected you, Mr. Rosenstein? Who voted that you be in power? And why do you have the superior moral authority to look down that big nose of yours at the 535 members of Congress who took the trouble to be elected and to consult us on their achieving power? But, Herr Rosenstein went on to say, "We understand the rules and we follow them," he added. "That's why I can assure you that everything we do at the Department of Justice is going to be consistent with the rule of law and consistent with the principles and traditions of the department." What that means is that if we're being asked to investigate something by the guy who appointed us or the guy who you elected, we're not going to do it. We're going to turn a blind eye to that because we refuse to be manipulated. On the other hand, if his political opponent suggests something, oh man, we're all over that, like my friend used to say, like white on rice. So those are the obstacles Trump faces, and you need to put that into perspective, the difficulties he faces and people pulling him the other way.
Lori Fedorik asks, why is Mueller given so much power when he is involved in the fruit of the poison tree? It is being said that Comey and Mueller had this special prosecutor set up.
Yeah, they did. Comey admits that he wrote these memos, released them, and leaked them of his meetings with Trump with a view toward forcing the appointment of a special prosecutor. And everybody knew it would be Mueller because it was Rosenstein making the appointment, and he had just really decided on Mueller. But why are they getting that power? Well, the reason they're getting it is that the special prosecutor is entitled to it legally, and Mueller is exercising his legal authority. But that is subject increasingly to a political check and balance. The Attorney General can rein him in. Rosenstein could, if he chose to. Rosenstein could be replaced by somebody that would rein him in. Congress can attach stuff to his appropriations or to the laws governing his procedure, limit his investigation, limit his money, limit his staffing, lots of checks and balances. What has to happen is there has to be a sufficient level of public outrage at the way he's running this thing to demand that those changes be made. So listen, this is fast and furious, these developments. Every day there's another thing. So please tune in each day. And remember, tomorrow, Thursday, I'm going to be broadcasting starting at 2. So if you want to catch it earlier, you can. On the other hand, if you want to watch at 4, it'll be available to you then, as it will be all day long. Now, the selfie of the day, that is the person who is on our page holding up a copy of our book, Rogue Spooks, is now Steve Albanese. Steve Albanese, and I gather you're a friend of Renee's here.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.